So this is the video for the carving and cutting into portion for the clay slab subtractive relief sculpture project. And so I have some of our standard clay tools, and we use these sometimes when we start working with clay. But this tool here is called a ribbon tool, so it has a couple of ends. It has two ends. One has sort of a sharper end, which is sort of a squarish kind of end thing, and the other one has a round loop. Okay, it's called a ribbon tool because when I cut the clay, it will produce a ribbon of clay that kind of runs out of there, and you'll see that in just a little bit, in just a minute. We also have our wood tool, our clay wood tool. This is good for like sort of shaping and pushing around parts of clay. You'll use this off and on when we do our other clay projects as well. I also have some tools that we don't normally usually get to use. In fact, this is kind of one of the few projects we'll get to use these. And I have an entire basket, and each basket has a number there that corresponds to the table number for the tables. So just make sure, don't just grab one randomly. We have to make sure we pass these out, and the table corresponds to the table that you are sitting at. But we have these little dental tools, which are good for scratching. We've got some other tools where you can cut in little parts. There are some chisel tools. Most of these are designed for wood, but they'll also work for the clay as well. Okay, so in the last video I was saying that before we go into the process of cutting and shaping and kind of pushing areas down, because this is still relief where we're not able to walk around this whole thing. It's kind of like a little tile where a sculpture's in here, okay? So we have to cut and we're removing material because this is subtractive, okay? So I have my design that matches up with my design on my piece, and you can see that design on there as I zoom in a little bit more. But I'll zoom back out. Okay, so I'm going to start with my ribbon tool to sort of show you how this, and there's this kind of S part right here, this part right in here. I want this to be higher than the part in the background. So I'm going to start with my ribbon tool, and I'm going to use the flat end. And so I'm not going to go down too far. Now remember, your clay slab is only that thick, so if you go down too far, it's going to break, and then you're going to have some problems with your tile later on. So we really only want to cut down about halfway into it. That's why we made our slab so thick. So I'll go ahead and just kind of cut into my piece, and I'm just going to kind of go around it when I lift up, so it kind of looks like a little ribbon, and that's why they're called a ribbon tool. And we can just set our little scraps off onto the table, and I'm going to sort of go around again, and I'll cut that off. And so I'm going around this whole little section here, and that's sort of the good part. The best thing to do is to sort of lower the areas in what you want cut, or that you want, lowering the areas around your area first. Now my slab is still a little wet. I did dry it with the hair dryer, but I'm starting to lower those areas, and there's some other things that I can do. I can push areas in, and you can see how much that's sort of dragging off of there. That just means that my slab is a little on the wet side. Okay, but I can use my wooden tool, and I can push little parts of there off of there. So right now what I'm doing is I've got an area on here where, right in here, where it's sort of like smooth out right here, but it kind of comes down at an angle. So I'm deciding to like curve that out. And so I'm just kind of taking the little bits off the end of my tool and just kind of holding it in my hand here as I go to keep that up that way. Now if I wanted to sort of make this an angle, I could kind of like push that like so that this ends up being like a little bit of an angle. Okay, back this out a little bit. All right. So I'm going to try some of the other tools in here. And if yours is behaving to where you still see little pieces in there, kind of zoom in. It's right in here. So if you see little areas that are sort of like these little ridgy areas, that just means your slab is a little too wet, which means you'll have to go back over and go to the yellow shelf and get the hairdryer and just dry it out a little bit more. But I'll go ahead and I'll try some of these other tools. So I'm going to have some lines that are sort of scratched in. So I'm going to find one of these tools here, and I'm going to sort of scratch in some lines. Okay, and they kind of made little raised bits of the clay there. So again, that just tells me my clay is a little too wet. But I can make some interesting little marks, depends on what my design's like. Maybe because I have this here that's higher, maybe I want to put some texture. And so I can scrape that to make some texture with these little lines. Now if this was dry enough, this is another tool here that's a really good one, this U tool. And some of these are kind of inexpensive, so just don't pull on these too much, because sometimes these do come out, and I can put them back in, but it's a little challenging. But with this one, I can kind of scoop material out like a little shovel if I wanted to get kind of a nice scoop of material. But the best thing to do is to start with the ribbon tool and try to see what other tools that you might need. Okay, because maybe I'm going to lower around this sort of little snaky form that I've made. So I've got all that removed, and I'm keeping this here. And maybe I want to smooth this out again with this part of this tool here, and I could sort of smooth that out as well.